Hello everybody and welcome back. My name is Kari and today I'm doing my January wrap-up. I read 14 books in January, I should open that, only 2 of which I own physically. So, let's start with those. That's not right. The first one I read was Conquering the Pacific by Andres Resendez, and there we go. I gave this one 3.5 stars. It is the story of Lope Martin and kind of his rival Urdaneta, who is a priest in the 1500s, working for Spain as they circumnavigate the globe. More specifically, they are going from Mexico to the Philippines or Guam or Indonesia, that area, to get spices and, you know, make Spain greater. Not that Spain really recovers after 88, but anyway, I really enjoyed this book. Except that I wanted it to be more about Martin and his specific story than I wanted it to be about the circumnavigation at large. And it did seem to be more about circumnavigation and sailing in the 1500s than it did specifically about Martin. And given that the subtitle is An Unknown Mariner and the Final Great Voyage in the Age of Discovery, it feels like there should have been more about Martin. Other book I own is The Singing by Alison Croghan, which is the 4th and final book in the Pelennor Chronicles. I was recommended this by Abby from Abby of Pelennor, and I came very close to finishing it last year. I did start this in 2022, and I think I finished it a couple days into 2022, so we're gonna call that close enough. Anyway, we follow Merid, who is a teenager at the beginning of it, I want to say 13, 14, living a not-so-great life, and she is found by a bard and brought into the bardic world, and it turns out light and dark are fighting each other at the moment, and she is an important part of this. I tend to describe it as a Lord of the Rings with a teenage girl protagonist, because that's what it feels like to me. Very similar, not similar, but no similar. Similar sort of vibes, right? Light and dark, group of people fighting, a lot of very dark moments, and I really enjoyed it. So, beyond that, I won't say much, just because it's the 4th and final book, and I don't want to spoil anything for you. But I did give this 4.5 stars, because I did like it, but there were, like, it is absolutely one I will read again. I don't know that it'll ever match its place for me like it does for Abby, right? I think this is her Graceling, and Graceling is my Pelennor. But it should say a lot that we both really like the other's favorite series. However, 4.5 because it's not life-changing for me, but it is really good and I am looking forward to rereading it sometime in the next couple years. And I say next couple years because Lord knows I am really horrible at rereading in any sort of timely fashion. Alright, now the ones I did not read. I mentioned how many I read, right? I think so, 14. The first one I read was Among the Maasai by Juliet Cutler. This is a memoir of a white woman's time with an evangelical outreach educational program in Ethiopia with the Maasai tribes, the Maasai peoples. And I liked that she addressed the evangelicalism and her discomfort with it. I liked that she addressed the white saviorism. My biggest hitch with this book was that I wanted her to dive more into that and kind of discuss what it looked like and what she did within herself even to address that in her unconscious biases and stuff like that. However, I recognize that this was published in the 90s, so that maybe wasn't part of her awareness. I don't know, but nonetheless, I really enjoyed this book and I gave it a 4.5 stars. Then I read Pet by Akwaeke Emezi, which is about a young girl named Jam who has a monster. It is a very short book, so I'm not going to say much more. However, to me, it read a dystopian utopian. Again, I gave this one 4 stars because it's not life-changing or really like top-of-mind awareness to me. However, I did really enjoy this book. I think it was cute. I think it handled really dark topics in a very bite-sized, presentable, manageable way. I thought the idea that after the end of the world as we know it, things actually got better. But then it turns out humans are just awful. And so we're gonna screw it up anyway. I enjoyed that take on end of the world because it's not something you see. Usually when you see it, you know, Hunger Games or Divergent, it's the world has just blown up and nothing ever gets fixed or better. Whether or not humans will ever make anything better is really debatable, but that is not the point. It was a good book. Then I read The King's Mistresses by Elizabeth C. Goldsmith, which I gave 3.5 stars. This is a nonfiction about Marie and Hortense Mancini. See previous videos for singing. I know Hortense Mancini and straight up just the name from the Horrible Histories Charles II song. I enjoyed this, but I wanted the author to make less conclusory statements about them because it felt like she was very much putting herself into these women, which as an author I recognize happens, but if you're going to put yourself into a book, then maybe write a fiction book, not a nonfiction book. Then I read The Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green, which I gave 2 stars because it was horrible for me. I recognize there is some merit to it, and there are some things I learned in the moment and then promptly forgot. The only one that sticks with me is Dr. Pepper is like nothing natural, it's just straight up all chemicals. It's really good for you, which is why it doesn't taste like anything that we can replicate otherwise. And I only remember that because it was brought up in book club. It felt like a disjointed memoir, and I hated it. Then I read Pirate's Witch, A Dark Reverse Harem by Jessamine Rue, which I gave 4 stars. I wanted there to be more of the woman main character and her power. I wanted there to be more on her, but the smut was really good. And it was just a fun read. Then I read 1603, A Turning Point in British History by Christopher Lee. I don't remember a lot of this book. I think it was, if you're looking for just an overview of 1603, then he does an okay job. It'll get you all the basic points. However, he has this atrocious habit of using 2 to 4 pages of primary source quotations. And I don't mean, a longer paragraph or a paragraph that starts at the bottom and goes a little bit into the page. No, I mean full 2 to 4 pages of this. And that drove me absolutely bonkers, particularly because he didn't need it. It added absolutely nothing to his story or his point. He had already summarized it and the point, didn't pick out the relevant bits, he just quoted the entire letter, speech, note, whatever it was, the entirety of it. I don't think this man should be writing nonfiction books. So I give it 2 stars. Then I read Elizabeth's Women, Friends, Rivals, and Foes Who Shaped Elizabeth I by Tracy Borman. I gave this one 4.5. I loved learning about some of the other women around Elizabeth I. I know some of the big ones, right? Kat Ashley, very important. Blanche Perry, very important. Bess of Hardwick is a name I've heard a couple of times. Mary Queen of Scots, probably heard of her. There's a movie a couple years back. It was an okay movie. There's a series with Adelaide Kane. Love Adelaide. Series is horrifically inaccurate in every possible sense of the word, other than the fact that there's Mary and Frances. Moving on. So I've really enjoyed learning about some of the lesser known women in her reign and how they shaped her, like Mary Sidney or her cousins or her mother, and some of the more specific stuff. You can tell that Tracy Borman is a historian, that she really researched this and has a passion for it, and I loved it. However, yes, I wanted a little bit more clarity sometimes. Sometimes it was unclear exactly who was who because there are so many Elizabeths, Catherines, Annes, Janes, Marys. They have like 5 names in Britain. And so I wanted a little bit more clarity on who was who and who was doing what sometimes. But overall, it was still really good. Then I read Last Night at the Telegraph Club by Melinda Lowe and gave this 4.25 stars. This one, it's not, again, a new favorite or life-changing for me, but it was really good. I liked the relationship and how it developed. I liked the look into lesbian life in San Francisco in the 1950s. I liked all of that kind of stuff. I think it was really fun. This book, because I haven't said it, is about a queer Chinese American girl in San Francisco Chinatown in the 1950s, in case you didn't catch that. She kind of figures out like, oh hey, I am not straight, and works her way kind of into the queer community from there. And I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed seeing that and seeing her parents' reaction. It was a little brutal, but I think Melinda Lowe handled it really well. Not least because she herself is queer, so it didn't feel like it was, traumatic. It was just sort of, hey, this is a cultural thing and this is what happens and how we deal with it after. It felt better. So yeah, I really enjoyed that. Then I read The Paris Bookseller by Kari-ng and gave this 4 stars. This is a historical fiction about Sylvia Beach, who founded Shakespeare and Company in Paris in the 1920s. Shakespeare & Co., if you don't know, is and was an English bookstore in Paris. Never been to France, so I've never been. But I think it was a really fun read. Again, not life-changing or really even a new favorite, but I did really enjoy it. I think a lot of historical fiction, for me, is that, like, this isn't going to be one that pops to mind when people say, oh, what's a really good historical fiction book? It's not going to be, oh, well, you should definitely read this one. But if you give me a couple of days, it'll come up. And I think, for me, that's sort of the difference between a 5-star and a 4-star. Just figured that out. Fun. But yeah, I did really enjoy it. I think it was good. It made me kind of want to read James Joyce a little bit more. Also kind of not, because he just sounds really dense. But at the same time, apparently he was extremely obscene for the time. So that makes me very curious. Then I read Anna, Duchess of Cleves, the King's Beloved Sister by Heather Darcy. Gave this one 3.5. You could very clearly tell it was not written by a historian and would have done much better, in my opinion, if it had been even reviewed by a historian. I appreciated that she had those like little reminders like umlauts and calling her Anna instead of Anne to remind people that, hey, this woman came from what is now part of Germany. You know, she wasn't English, she wasn't French, she wasn't Spanish. She's not one of those like big power daughters, right? She's from a small duchy. But I did think it was really interesting. She also made a couple of conclusory statements or assumptions that I didn't love. Not because I think she was wrong, I don't know enough about Anne of Cleves, but just because I don't necessarily love conclusory statements being made on behalf of somebody who's been dead for 500 years. However, I did like this book. I learned a lot about Anne of Cleves that I didn't know before. Then I read 400 Souls, edited by Abram X. Kendi, which I gave 4 stars. I really liked the history. It is a series of 80 different essays covering 5 years from 1619 to 2019 when the book is published. I think the historical aspect was absolutely fascinating. However, I didn't necessarily love the repetition in some of the essays, and I didn't love all of the we're being crabs. I didn't love the repetition. Some of the essays obviously kind of focused on the same event within the 10-year span, and each of them were supposed to be 5 years, and I get that, but at the same time, if you're given 5 years, I feel like you should find something that is that specific to that 5 years. Maybe it's just me. Oh my god, there's something else I didn't love, but I can't remember it at the moment because my brain's dead. But either way, other than that, I think it was a really good book. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I definitely learned a lot about African America history, or the history of African America, there we go, that I didn't know before, and certainly from a different perspective than I had seen before. And the last book I read was A Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin, which I gave 2 stars. I feel a little bit bad about that because Gwyn is a well-known, well-beloved name in the classic fantasy genre or time. But I know. One, I think Rowling was either inspired or ripped off by or parts of this book, because there were definitely very clear parallels. 2, I think I'm using numbers, she told and didn't show. 3, there was no dialogue in any meaningful capacity until more than halfway through the book, and the book is only maybe 300 pages long. 4, there's not really any character development. 5, I didn't really love the world. 6, the main character is an asshole. I will not continue with that series. Oh yeah, 7, internalized misogyny, and I know that it's published in 1968, so maybe that's, you know, some stuff that the author had to work through, because I think she was fairly young when she published the book. It's one of her first published books. I'm hoping she got better in her later work. I will probably read something from the 90s or 2000s, assuming she has anything written then. But I didn't like it. My friend Katie, who I buddy read this with, as well as Chelsea, Katie really enjoyed it. She felt like the character development got much better towards the end, and liked the dialogue and the world building and read much more into it. But Katie is a much more positive person than I am. So whereas I tend to see the negative, she sees the positive. We balance each other out very well. Chelsea was kind of in the middle of us, but she definitely saw more of the internalized misogyny than I think at least Katie said. Katie didn't mention anything about seeing that. But yeah, so we were probably 2, 3, and 4 stars ultimately in this book. Anyway, that's all I have for my January wrap-up. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!